Welcome to the Mindcraft podcast. My name is Dr. Kimberly Quinn, and I have with me Steve Lentini. I am so super stoked to have Steve as a guest. Steve is actually an author, a speaker, and an executive coach, loaded with stories about rewiring the brain, which is, one of our favorite topics on Mindcraft. And so, really, without further ado, Steve, I'd just like to give you a huge Mindcraft welcome. And we're glad to have you.
Oh, thank you. I'm grateful and glad that Ryan introduced us, Ryan Dunphy. And when I looked at what you're doing in your podcast, I mean, so much of it is, I would say 100%. There was nothing that was not in alignment with what I talk about and help people with. And that's really become my calling since my near-death experience 21 years ago.
Excellent, Steve. And I know you and I talked a little bit off the record about that, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say about that. How about if you'd like to kind of ease in with you and I were talking about, and I think we're both the same like this. We could talk about neurons all day long and probably not have one bored second, right? So you're a big fan of rewiring the brain and creating positive neural pathways. Why don't you start by talking to us? Remembering we might have some newer listeners.
Sure.
Kind of explaining, maybe toss at me that Albert Einstein quote too. That was a pretty good one.
Sure. Well, that's one of my guiding principles that Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. And that's not saying that I think my audience is 6-year-olds, but I want to make sure that I don't assume that people know all about how to manage the brain and that it can be done. What I've discovered in my work, I'm embarrassed to say it didn't really start until I was 50, when I really woke up to what was possible. And I realized that I was primarily the block to whatever I wanted to achieve in life. And it wasn't just material wealth. Certainly prosperity covers everything, relationships and love and our fellow employees and our just attitude every day in terms of living, that there's plenty of everything, love, understanding, and that by beginning to give everything, that you can't give what you don't have. As you begin to give, more shows up, and we're trained not to do that. So many of us are trained not to do that from being a little child. And parents, I remember my parents saying to me, there's people starving all over the world. You have to eat everything. And why did you give your toy away to the neighbor? And I remember my grandfather actually taking a walk. He came from Italy. He took a walk to go get it back because the lack mentality, the idea there wasn't enough, was so prevalent. And I was born in 1952. And when it came to children, my parents didn't think in terms of lack because they had 7, and my twin brother and I were number 6 and 7, and spread out over 20 years. My oldest, I didn't meet him until my oldest brother until I was 10, and he was 29.
Wow, that's a spread.
Yeah, that's a spread. But I can tell you, when it came to food or money or things like that, toys or giving anything away, it was really considered something not to do. And so to be wired like that, and so many people are wired about it, it's challenging to overcome that. And that's where a coach comes in. That's where, and these dialogues, your podcast is so great. Gratitude. I mean, I don't remember ever in our dinner table, it started out with, all right, let's talk about 3 things we were grateful for today. And that's something I do every morning, every night, and often during the day, just to reflect on what I'm grateful for. I'm grateful for this opportunity right here, for example. It's just to help people is really my calling, especially since I had that event in 2002. But the other thing I noticed is that most people believe they're thinking. And there's a lot of the automatic thought leads to an automatic response. And I would say probably 90% of the time, it's not good, right? It turns out later to be one of these things that I say to people, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And we all have those moments. And by the way, for me, doing this work now for 24 years, 25 years, I still have to do the work. There's no destination. I tell my coaching clients that if I ever tell you I found the way, run away, because there is no way. There's only each of our journeys. And to have expanded thinking beyond small-minded thinking
Mhm.
it takes training. It takes training. And a continued ongoing conversation about that brain. The automatic brain typically lies because it remembers every mistake, every failure, every disappointment, every error. So many people are bound by the idea of sin, or so now it's every sin they made, and it flashes it back. At least for me, in my experience, I'm driving down the road and up comes something from 25 years ago. Hey, dummy, you remember you did this? And today I can say, well, I can chuckle at myself and say, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
100%.
Yeah.
I think too, Steve, you're touching on like a big one that, as you know, we both are doing a lot of the similar things. And really what you're talking about is scarcity mindset, right? And
Yeah.
that's so super strong. And just one quick example, because I think it feeds right into it, is
Yeah.
I did several podcasts back when the pandemic, I affectionately, or not so much, call it the Rona-virus, right? But when the toilet paper went flying off the shelves, that was about way more than toilet paper. That
Way
was
more.
tapping into a lot of, I have actually a friend who grew up dirt poor, and
Yeah.
you've got the money thing, but we can be, I think people get confused, and I'll let you run with this because I know you can. People
Yeah.
go straight to money, right? And that's because that's the most common, but we can have a scarcity of love, scarcity of self-esteem, scarcity of confidence, scarcity of all kinds of things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Besides, but when the toilet paper thing happened, all those wounds
Yeah.
showing up by sweeping the toilet paper off the shelf.
Yeah.
And so I
I
think you're kind of
remember.
tapping into that, how
Yeah.
powerful and how it stays with us. Because you said 25 years later or whatever it was,
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that deprivation or the mistake, because it just that because the as you know, the subconscious, the unconscious drives the bus.
It
And that's
does.
what's going on.
That's what's going on. And that subconscious is very much like learning driving or learning anything new. But I like to use driving, right? Because when we first get in the car, we're nervous. I mean, we don't want to make any mistakes because there could be an outcome that's very negative, right? An accident or hitting somebody, or so we're very cautious. Over time, I can say that I've driven to New England once a month, and every once in a while, my brain says, wait, who just drove the last 5 miles or 4 miles? It becomes automatic. What I didn't connect many years ago was that my childhood and many events that happened that my brain labeled negative, they too became automatic responses
Mhm,
to
mhm.
certain situations or certain people. So when certain people that upset me from the past would come across maybe a totally new cast of characters, somebody totally different, but they had similar characteristics, my brain said, the subconscious said, oh, you know how to deal with this person, give them a piece
Right,
of your mind. And it was an automatic reaction. And when I realized I could change those circumstances by taking a pause and understanding, back then I didn't know that, I didn't have the idea that the brain lied or that you could rewire it. Joe Dispenza talks about that a lot,
Love
that you
him.
can rewire the brain or remind yourself. I love the way he says it. I had no idea that, but as I took a pause, I realized, wait, let me just find out what's going on. Maybe it's not me. Maybe it's just something going on for that person. And when I got into a dialogue, instead of the monologue in my head, right, the story I was telling myself was, wow, here they are. They're after me, or they're hurt. I did something.
Mhm.
And when I had the dialogue, they said, what's going on? You're really upset. Was it something I did? Talk to me a little bit. When I had the dialogues, whole different outcomes occurred. That was the beginning of rewiring because I started to notice what triggered me. And that was the beginning of self-observation. I didn't know what it was called, but
Mhm, mhm,
I
mhm.
started to notice the events and the people that triggered me. And then I started to notice by just noticing the similarities with and I remembered some of the past events. Wait, I know where that came from. And it's fascinating because the brain remembered it, and it just would say to me, Steve, this is how you react. This is, you know how to handle this, very much like driving. And as I matured and met many fascinating people, some of them in Vermont. In fact, my coach, Tony Stone, lived in Fairfax. She was my coach for 20 years. Um, she was a prosperity teacher. That's what she called herself. But I
Love
can tell you, she was more than that, because she talked about George Ivanovich Gurdjieff calling the mind the machine. And do you want to be run by the machine, or do you want to run it? And when I got that I could run it, maybe today, after all these years, I might be at 50 to 60%. I might be, because again, if I ever found the way, if I ever think I found the way, I know I'm lying to myself. There isn't a way. There's the continued journey. The gift of life is when we can look at every moment as an opportunity to learn, that it is a gift somewhere. Even some of my darkest moments, as I look back now, they were the greatest gifts and the most, let's see, the people who were willing to risk my wrath by telling me what I was doing, right? Where maybe I had my head in a very dark spot, right? They'd say, what's going on with you? Well, when I realized they were a gift, they were risking my wrath to tell me, as far as they knew, I wasn't showing up as someone with integrity or prosperity mindset, or
it.
I think it was a landmark term. Um, what's going on with you? You're on it, is what they'd say. It was a landmark and est term. And when I took some time to pause rather than react, I'd say, yeah, you're right, I'm on it. Here's what I'm on it about, or here's what I'm upset about. Changed my life. It's still changing my life, because the invitation from that part of the brain that remembers all those events and people, it still wants me to judge or to feel sad. Even those moments, I recognize now that when I start to feel that way, it's tied to something in the past. The brain is going, oh, this always makes you sad. And as I've rewired it, and I think you mentioned it, right? Because I'm happier.
Of course.
And it was nothing from the outside that made me happier. I'm living more from the inside out. I'm deciding to be happy.
Oh, I
And
love
it's
it. I
happening.
love it.
It's happening.
Deciding to be happy, Steve.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and in fact, I just want to jump in here because you said Joe Dispenza. I love him too. He's in my friend circle. He's not
Yeah.
aware, but he's in there with Oprah, who's my favorite.
Yeah.
Joe Dispenza, correct me if I'm wrong. I think he says after it's like mid-30s or something, about roughly 95% of what we think, say, and do is exactly the
Well,
same as we did yesterday, last week, last month. Context
yeah.
different because
Yeah.
it's in the vault. That's why I
Yeah.
call the unconscious the vault.
Yeah. And it took me, I was in my mid 40s when I finally met people that were on this journey of expanding their small-minded thinking into
Right, right,
something
right.
larger. And so it took me, so I'm 71 this year. It took me a long time, I'm embarrassed to say. And then my near-death experience was really the icing on the cake. And so many people were like, they came to see me, and I was grateful. I was grateful even getting in the ambulance. I think I shared that with you. I had this amazing feeling of gratitude as I was waiting for the ambulance. People were asking me, how are you doing? Because one second I was fine teaching a group of people, the next second I needed an ambulance. And I said, I don't know how my body's doing, but I'm grateful. I had this overwhelming feeling of gratitude. And as I reflect back on it, it was the presence of whatever created this experience, the infinite universe, the divine, God, the goddess. It doesn't matter what you call it, but I didn't know that for sure until 5 days later. In intensive care, I flatlined one second with two friends at the end of my bed. The next second, I was one with everything and nothing. I was one with the infinite. Amazing. Words don't even describe it. Just infinite light, infinite mercy, infinite love. And then there was a life review, and only the good I had done, every life I had touched. Of course, family and friends, where people I had helped move. I mean, everything flashed before me, but people I helped across the street, brought groceries up their stairs, smiled at. We have no idea that the good we do is somehow etched onto the fabric of time, because we have so much of the dialogue about sin and mistakes and we're going to hell.
Mhm.
And I probably should have gone to hell if there was one. I doubt that there is. But after that life review, then I was asked the question, stay or go. And my consciousness responded with, thy will be done, because it's not like having a dialogue. In fact, it was the now, I call it on steroids, because there was a scene, which I'm all of a sudden one with everything and nothing in the light, in immense love and mercy and grace. Then there was the life review, and then there was the question, which I could not tie together while I was there. There was no past or future. There's nothing what I call it the acorn brain, right? The small-minded thinker that is with us 24 hours a day incessantly until we can learn to manage it. We can
Right,
reduce
right.
the volume of that voice, but it doesn't go with us. Instead of death, I call it what's next, that we go from this to that.
I like that.
Even the word scares the hell out of us. I know it did me for many years, but there it was on my doorstep, and I had no fear. I was already in what I have to remind myself now, back in my body, but in what I call what Eckhart Tolle calls, I was in the now, and it's amazing. It's it's if we could all experience it, not before this podcast ends. I wish everyone a long life, but if we could all experience it, we wouldn't be so petty.
Right,
And
right,
the
right.
gift is to live this life fully, and then to look at the things that come that bother us as a gift somehow, right? And it may take time. Some events are really hard to find the gift in, but even people, I think of the gal whose daughter was killed by a drunk driver. She decided sometime after going through her grief that she started Mothers Against Drunk Driving. She was going to do something with it. And so even in that kind of a tragedy, she found a tremendous gift and is making a difference to this day.
I'm that's fantastic, Steve. And it's amazing when people are able to overcome something and also forgive. And I think a lot of people get tripped up in that because I think when they forgive or let go of something, if they don't even like the word forgive, some people don't like the word. If they let
Yeah.
it go, they think it gives the wrongdoer, hurt, offender, perpetrator a pass. And no, it does not, right? It has everything to do with moving forward. And my dear friend Oprah, she's just not aware, but her
Yeah.
friend Dr. Jakes, if you've ever heard that
Yeah. Yeah, of
well,
course.
he says, right, he says, and I'm going to paraphrase for you, but when
Yeah.
we hang on to our history, it's at the expense of our destiny. And I think that fits in with exactly what you're saying. Because if you look at it like a pizza, like a circle, we have so much emotional energy for one day, right? So if a
Hmm.
big old slice goes to 2015 or
Hmm.
last week, or who told a lie about you in third grade, right?
Hmm.
That only
Hmm.
leaves this much left for full throttle living your best life, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think people get that. I think, see what you think about. I think that they don't like that they think it gives somebody a pass. I also think they're also waiting sometimes for the forgiveness fairy to sprinkle let it go dust on them. Just like you said, we have to decide to be happy. We have to decide to forgive,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Yeah. Well, what if nothing was personal? What if nothing was personal? That it's just part of this mystery that we live in?
Right.
Because you and I talked about that. We live in a miracle. This is a marble with the earth painted on it, and we're probably that big in relation to space. I've had a few physicists tell me, Steve, we're smaller than that marble,
Right.
but that marble is a good idea to have on your desk to remind you that we're 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 already living in a miracle. We think we're not, especially when certain events come, because the
Right. Right.
brain
Right.
wants to define it good or bad. Who
Well,
knows?
instead of
Maybe
just
good, maybe bad. Right?
contrast. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Say that again, Steve.
No, maybe good, maybe bad. The old Sufi
Right.
tale. Who knows?
Yeah, because I was thinking this is also very Wayne Dyer and also Abraham Hicks, but and it took me you've been wonderfully honest about how it's taken. It's taken me a while too to like life's curveballs. We call them whatever that it is. But when we for me it helped to look at it as contrast because life is like a lasagna noodle, right? We're happy when everybody's getting awards and the
I love
families
that.
for together for Thanksgiving. There's a new baby, there's a wedding, and then right. And when it's
Yeah.
contrast, and I like how you say about not taking it personally, because all those characters in our lives that maybe snatch a promotion out from underneath us or gossip or do it, that contrast. And what shifted it for me, it might have been Wayne Dyer, actually. I'm trying to think, but when we instead look at it as like, why did this happen to me or whatever, this looking at life happens for us, not to us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for me, just hearing that one liner
Yeah.
helped me turn that, like, this is contrast. And then there's that Buddhist thing, as you mentioned it earlier, basically keeping the mind open to everything and attached to nothing. When I stopped, I'm actually thinking of a few pricklies I had in a work experience. They were
Yeah.
just toxic in a long time ago work experience. And
Yeah.
I got wrapped up in it for a while until I learned to separate their ego-driven behavior has nothing to do with me.
No. Yeah. Well, when I wrote the book Sage Advice last year, what I did was looked up a bunch of sages. I think there's 75. I have the book. I should know the number. I'm working on the next edition of it, but first I completed another book, but 69 sages. Oh
Wow.
no, hold on. I'm sorry. No, 60 sages. And I lied, 62. There's 3 pages of table of contents. But Christ said everything works together for good. I included him in the book. There weren't a lot of quotes from Christ, but Muhammad said one that really struck me. What reaches you was never meant to miss you, and what misses you was never meant to reach you. And that's about whatever reaches us was never meant to miss me. So I think about that, especially when, I want to do something and the dogs want to eat. And I say, okay, it's time to go feed them. But there
Right, right,
would
right.
be in the past, I'd be like, I mean, it would actually interrupt my day. Now I'm using a little minor upset, right? But can you imagine the upsets that used to get me, right? They would hook me. It'd be like the fish in the stream, right? They bypass certain lures, but then something hooks them. Well, that's what our mind is doing. And something hooks me. It takes me away from really being fully present with what reached me.
Yes.
There's a gift in it somewhere. And the bigger things have come in the midst of a mess. And to your point about the ego-driven people, maybe the brain wanted you to think they were doing it to you. What if they were doing it for you, right? The
Right.
redirection, right? Time to let this go, move somewhere else. That it was Helen Keller. She's in the book too that said, that humans that we tend to look at the door that closed so long that we miss the doors that open. And
Oh, wow.
prosperity mindset is to look at everything as a gift, that there's something in it. Now, is it okay to feel hurt and upset and angry? And yes, for to notice and feel those feelings. Like, where do they show up in the body? To embrace your humanness and then say, okay, activate something else. What can I do with this? Right? To
Right.
have that dialogue with yourself that actually Joe Dispenza talks about it, is rewiring. It's adding things to the positive side of the brain, stored, I believe, on the left side of the neocortex, and the right side stores all those little mistakes that pop up from at any moment, right? So fascinating that we can do it. And then MRIs have proven that new neural pathways open, very similar to people that suffer strokes.
Oh, 100%.
So yeah, so if we believing our mind, maybe we're living in a stroke.
It amazes me too, Steve, that people often think like things like gratitude, we were talking about that, and all these things you're talking about are all touchy-feely. We can actually see them on fMRIs. We can see. And the other thing I know you're aware of too is that as we're creating new positive neural pathways, something called neural pruning is happening too. Like that, if you don't use it, you
I
lose it.
love it.
When we
Yeah,
become less negative, those neurons fade away because they're not being used anymore,
yeah,
which is a
yeah.
good thing. Not so good if that's your high school Spanish because you don't hang on to it, but if we're becoming less negative as we become positive, it's like it's a double bonus, I guess.
Yeah, it's like a branch falling off a
Right.
plant. It's not getting the sun and it falls away, but the other part of the plant or the tree continues to grow. Yeah.
100%.
And you mentioned the pruning. I think Joe Dispenza says that neural researchers call it pruning and then sprouting, that something new occurs as we let go of that old small-minded thinking, scarcity mindset, the hurts and the things that we perceived or took personal. And when we're carrying it around, I would say often the person who did it to us is not. We're the only one carrying it around.
Right, right. So I'm wondering, Steve, this is good news. So let's say this has been some fantastic, super enriched content. If somebody is having some aha moments, our listeners out there having some aha moments, I'm wondering what your advice, let's say they're more at the beginning of the hiking path, kind
Mhm,
of getting the light switches turned on now, like, wow,
mhm,
Steve just said stuff. The whole idea of the acorn brain. Some people
mhm.
may not know of scarcity mindset, not until now,
True. Mhm,
understanding the power and understanding the power of gratitude, things like that. What
mhm.
might be your advice for someone to start making some steps in the way of more self-awareness and living their sort of best version of themselves?
Yeah. Well, it might start with just telling themselves that that voice is lying. It's not true. That's not the path to take if they're feeling all emotional and angry and they want to react. I hyphenate actually reacting when I send
Mhm,
notes to my clients because it's something previously learned. They're actually reacting
mhm,
something from
mhm.
the past and to respond. So simply to get on the path would be to just breathe and notice what triggers them. Just begin with that, noticing, because then they'll, even in the midst of an explosion, they might be in the middle of an
Mhm,
explosion
mhm, mhm.
against somebody or at somebody and say, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm triggered. Give me some time. Let's talk about this tomorrow. Or give me a few minutes because I want to reframe this and I want to think about it. But even in the midst of an explosion, when we start to notice our triggers, things occur. That opens the door
Right.
to rewire their thinking.
Oh, I love that. And I like the whole, you've mentioned the hit the pause button a bunch. And I think that is so huge for people to take that away because often when we're in limbic system mode, right, where all the fight, flight, all that's going on, when we're in limbic system mode, we're not, the rational brain is offline, right? So the best thing we can do is step out. And I've told people before, if you have to step into the bathroom, who's going to bother you there? Hopefully. Because
Right.
don't you think, Steve, that even like 2 minutes of
Yes.
a break is better than no minutes of a break?
Yes. It could be 2 minutes. You might need more time to think about it, but once that break is taken, it's a pattern interrupt. It
Right.
interrupts that subconscious that says, wait, you know how to handle this? You tell them off. You give them a piece of your mind. And you say no. You say no. And you take that break, something occurs. Now, we talked about it, right? It's a journey, not a destination. That it's work that's required for the rest of their life. But
Hmm.
it does get better. It does. The volume of that voice gets lowered. And I think people really start to look at events with an embrace, right? Empathy and embrace. They're like, okay, wow, this is interesting. Doesn't feel real good, but there's something in this for me, like you said, that life is for us.
Not doesn't happen to right. And I think I just remember like the light went on with that, Steve, way back when, because it's a tough sell when you're in it,
Yes.
but when you look back at it, of course it's contrast is part of life. We don't grow without it, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so that helped me to depersonalize, as you said so eloquently, because when we personalize something, that's the ego sliding into the driver's seat and the authentic self got bumped into the back seat or maybe even the trunk, right? And I'm just saying, when we really, because the authentic self isn't a reactor. The authentic self doesn't need kudos. The authentic self doesn't need any of that stuff.
Yeah.
That's all the ego talking.
Yeah. Yeah. When Wayne Dyer used to call it edging God out. And I think,
Yes.
yeah, right, edging God out. Yeah, it's fascinating work, and to encourage people to just start to notice where they get triggered and who triggers them, they can change it beginning to just notice. And it's a simple enough place to start.
Okay, this is excellent. I think what I have to wind us up here, Steve, is because you said the word notice a few times, and I think that's sort of key because we can't do what we don't know.
Can't
We
do it.
can't. Once we know better, we can
Yeah,
do better, right? So the notice thing I think is huge awareness, right? Then knowing that we can hit the pause button and step in that power place, even if it's something big and huge that you have to actually excuse yourself, or if it's that situation. If it's a
yeah,
lesser situation, you can step out of the current and get some quiet in the woods or something. That's even better, right? And
yeah,
then and then the last one was kind of um, knowing that you can change, I think is super empowering. Because you use the word decide a lot, which I love because that means take charge, become the boss of your brain is Minecraft's whole thing, right?
yeah,
So notice, hit the pause button and know that you can change, right? And step into your
yeah,
power place. I think that's fantastic.
yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and people have to prove it to themselves, right? Not to take our word for it, but make their life that experiment. Start to do
Right.
it. They will prove it to themselves, at least in my experience, because I didn't believe it many years ago. In fact, going back maybe 30 years, I didn't know. I just believed my thinking. I didn't know there was the possibility to change it. And then as I started noticing on that journey, it's been amazing. I'm
Oh,
blessed.
it's amazing. I tell you, it's because you and I, Steve, are seasoned, much like good wine. I think that's how it happens. And I don't know for men if it's the same, but my women friends, I'm a fabulous 59, and my women friends and I will tell you hands down how much we love our 50s because we wouldn't trade them for the 20s. We had fun, but
Yeah.
the wisdom and feeling so comfortable in your skin and it's I wouldn't trade it for anything. Like how I feel, no
Yeah.
way.
No, and it was like life gave me that big I say I got whacked by a 2x4 when I was 50, like you're gonna wake up. Now, had I not gotten it, then maybe who knows where I would be today. But and I got that amazing gift of it's
Mhm.
time to look at things very
Differently.
differently.
And it
And
ignited your motivation. That's
it
fantastic.
ignited my motivation.
Oh, I just love that. Complete with a near-death experience. So here we have Steve Lentini. We're going to say, notice, hit the pause button, know that you can change and step into your power place. And I would like to actually first, before I thank you for being here, we have to mention that Steve, as we mentioned earlier, is an author, speaker, and executive coach. Steve has his own website that is stevelentini.com. It will also be below. And it will also be on the end of the video too. So Steve Lentini, just like his name.com. Steve also has a podcast that is Different Thinking for Different Times. That's correct.
Yeah.
Which you
Yes.
can see on Spotify. But you can, I think it's pretty much one-stop shopping for everything else on his website. So you'll see that in a couple of places and reach out to Steve with any questions you have. So Steve, it has been a gift and a privilege to have you on the Minecraft podcast. Thank you
Mhm.
so much for being with us here today.
Thank you, Kimberly. I am so grateful and grateful for anybody who might start on the journey of noticing how they can run their mind. And that's my job.